For the next 90 minutes, we will be questioning the candidates following a format designed and agreed to by representatives of the two campaigns.
The year is 1988, 1 month out from Election Day. In an auditorium in Omaha, Nebraska, a serious-faced 41-year-old Dan Quayle is making his case to America.
The question goes to whether I am qualified to be vice president, and in the case of a tragedy, whether I'm qualified to be president.
A case for why he, quite young compared to his more seasoned competitor in the vice presidential race, is accomplished enough to step into the presidency, should the unthinkable happen.
I have far more experience than many others that sought the office of vice president of this country. I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
Just then, the camera pans across to Quayle's competition. Two skeptical eyebrows shoot up behind big 1980s wireframe glasses. The tall, steady 58-year-old next to Quayle shakes his head.
Senator Bentsen?
His opponent is Lloyd Bentsen, the senior senator from Texas.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Dan Quayle may have gotten elected vice president, but no one has ever forgotten that line. It has become a benchmark for every single vice presidential debate since. Lloyd Bentsen and that brutal line set the standard for debate success every 4 years, including the most recent one in 2024. But Lloyd Bentsen was so much more than a televised zinger. 25 years on from that unforgettable moment, we look back on the tall, cool, composed man with the silver hair on that stage and ask, who was he? The answer? It takes us from the citrus groves of South Texas to the skies of Italy in World War II, to the hustle-bustle of Houston and its rise as an energy giant, and to Washington, where his colleagues are a who's who of American history. Gerald Ford, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Sam Rayburn, Lyndon Johnson, Scoop Jackson, Jack Kennedy, of course, and Bill Clinton.
He had a massive positive impact on people here at home and all around the world.
He's a marvelous politician, a person of great dignity, a person who can look up to and respect and like as well.
He really wanted to make the world a much safer, better place for everyone.
But this is not just an interesting trip down the annals of American congressional history. The wildest thing about the patrician, congenial presidential man on that debate stage? His whole half a century of unbelievable public life. The work of Lloyd Bentsen has so much to tell us about how to solve some of today's most intractable problems.
Yeah, the Fed is still trying to cool record-high inflation that's hitting Americans pretty hard.
The government's just borrowing incredibly large amounts of money.
High interest rates, a ballooning deficit, tensions with longtime adversaries, Russia and China.
Harrowing accounts of torture from refugees who fled China and say they still don't feel safe.
Russia launching a nationwide attack across Ukraine, one of the largest of the war.
President Putin is counting on divisions in the United States to give him victory in Ukraine.
These are a set of problems that we as a country have faced before. And a journey into Lloyd Bentsen's history is a journey through a set of solutions that worked. His innovative campaign leadership changed the political landscape in the Lone Star State and Washington, D.C. for at least a generation. His policy work helped alleviate poverty, give health care to more Americans, and help them in retirement. He championed fair trade. He supported civil rights and pushed for a stronger U.S. economy. His influence on the country is most felt in economic prosperity that lasted a decade. Here's Bill Clinton.
For Lloyd Bentsen, it was quite a life.
Yet no historian, no documentarian, no podcaster, has tackled a complete biography, partly because of Bentsen himself. He came from a generation that let its actions speak louder than words. So the story of Lloyd Bentsen and the lessons we desperately need to take from his life in public service haven't yet been written. That changes now. I'm Patrick Frank, and this is the Bentsen Blueprint. Lloyd Bentsen and 50 years of public life, much of it in his own words. A never-before-made public trove of interviews with Bentsen shed light on how he was able to do what he did and helps us understand what we can do today.
2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3. Well, how do you wish to begin, Senator?
I don't know. I'm new to this.
To better understand the future, we must go back to the past. We'll go back about 100 years to a tiny Texas town along the Rio Grande River that separates the U.S. and Mexico. A town called Mission.
We can look down both banks of the Rio Grande, over the vast lands of South Texas and the hills of Mexico.
Lloyd Bentsen Jr. came up among the acres and acres of citrus groves in far South Texas. A landscape dotted with farms and ranches, thatched roof homes, agave plants, where the temperatures regularly climbed above 100. And most of the children were Mexican or had Mexican roots. His father, Lloyd Sr., had moved from South Dakota to the southern tip of Texas, known as the Rio Grande Valley, in 1919. Mission was home of the ruby red grapefruit. The ruby red, a favored strain of grapefruit that later got its own patent. The availability of financing and the attractiveness of the valley's real estate potential rapidly expanded the local economy. Lloyd Sr. and his brother Elmer started the family business by seeking investors in land and cattle, and kept some of both to farm. As a child, Lloyd Jr. worked as a farmhand, tending to the grapefruit groves and caring for the livestock.
My first horse cost $9. The black mare. Spent a good part of my summers riding that. Go down my friends and swim in the Rio Grande, strip off and swim to the other side.
He went to school in a small schoolhouse. 12 people made up his entire graduating class, but he got a supplemental education in Spanish, thanks to his surroundings.
So I learned it from my playmates, who were Mexican-Americans, many of them.
Despite having land, Bentsen's family was frugal. His father lived through the Depression, and his methods for saving money are now part of Bentsen's family lore. Here's Lloyd Bentsen, recalling that period during an oral history interview in 1989.
And the doctor said, well, we're going to have to take out his tonsils. My father said, what would it cost? The doctor said, whatever it was. My father said, do all children finally have to have their tonsils out? And the doctor said, yes, which is what they believed in those days. And my father said, well, what would you charge for 5? And the doctor said, 5? I said, yes. Father said, yes, I said 5. And he said, well, Lloyd, you don't have 5. I said, well, between my brother and myself, we have 5. And so he said, gave him a cut rate. And so that afternoon, the 5 of us had our tonsils out in the doctor's office. But he always bought everything in quantity by case because he'd get a discount, whatever it was.
As a boy, Lloyd Bentsen was an outdoorsy and confident kid. As an Eagle Scout, he earned his sailing badge on the Rio Grande River. Then at age 16, Bentsen became the first in his family to go to college. He drove himself the 8 hours it took back then on Highway 281 to get to the University of Texas in Austin and registered. Upperclassmen selected him to join the school's Texas Cowboys, an honorary spirit organization. At that time, part of the cowboy initiation ritual was to have UT branded on members' chests, a brand that was visible to the day he died. As World War II was beginning in Europe, Bentsen also joined a fraternity, Sigma Nu. Members elected him fraternity president. He lied about his age to enter the UT Law School at age 18. He studied, he fraternized, he went on dates, living life in a straight line. But all that was about to change.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
The year was 1941. With Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, the war had reached American shores.
There is a conviction in official quarters here that Japan has now cast the die.
General Dwight D. Eisenhower's headquarters announced today that Allied troops began landing on the northern coast of France this morning.
The University of Texas Law School agreed to allow immediate enrollment after the attack on Pearl Harbor, offering to award any enlistees their diplomas in June of 1942. Lloyd Bentsen turned 21 in February 1942. He immediately enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He and his fraternity brothers all decided to enlist together. The stakes were too high.
We thought it was the right cause, and it did mean preservation of democracy, and that Hitler was a dictator, and that he was a demagogue. And so we went off, and I volunteered, as did so many others.
What happened next would change the trajectory of his life.
I was not a particularly thoughtful fellow. And just a major change in me came about in the war that I held up and was serious.
And the ripple effect of that decision would stretch from personal to political to the American history books. It's 1942. Upon enlisting, commanders sent Lloyd Bentsen Jr. to Combat Intelligence School in Pennsylvania. His law degree got him placed into the officer ranks as an intelligence officer. He could potentially become an American asset abroad. But he was also a 21-year-old kid, and his mind was on other things. A girl. While he was at the University of Texas, he asked out another student. The fair-skinned, tall, feminine Beryl Ann, or B.A., Bentsen was smitten with B.A. from the start. Her charm, her smarts, her good looks, and the date, well...
She thought I was going to take her to a dance. I took her to a circus. She was dressed for the dance and not for the circus.
They didn't go on another immediate date, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. B.A. went to screen test in Hollywood and didn't love it. Instead, she had moved to New York and was modeling for Vogue and Mademoiselle magazine. Sure, war was raging in Europe, but he had to find a way to get up to New York and see her once again. So while he was in intelligence training in Philadelphia, he arranged a day to travel to New York City. Once there, he'd try to reach out. He had one day to make the plan work.
That's name, I thought maybe I could find her in the phone. But I did. I called her about 6 in the morning, but I didn't have much time. She joined me at breakfast. She was incredibly pleasant. And so that's pretty impressive at this hour.
One date turned into another, and then another. A Dutch treat ski trip to Vermont, for example. But the arrangement didn't last. His time was not his own. Bentsen got official notice from the Army. His intelligence training was taking him away from B.A. He was headed to Brazil.
The Army, in all of its wisdom, sent me down there because I spoke Spanish. Of course, they speak Portuguese.
So he's in Brazil, several countries away from B.A. He doesn't speak the language. And then the whole thing gets worse. Lloyd runs into someone he knows, a fraternity brother, but not one he's happy to see. Because this guy, He's a rival, a romantic rival.
When we were in college, I had one date with BA, and then he came in one day and he said, well, Lloyd, I'm going back to the States. I've been down here 2 years. And I said, you're going back to New York, aren't you? So you don't think I'd do that? I said, I damn sure did.
B.A. had just that kind of pull. Lloyd felt it. He was sure his buddy felt it too.
I knew I was in trouble. And so I went into the personnel officer and I said, I've got to get back to the States. I said, I don't give a damn. Just the next school gets me back to the States. He said, how about flying? I said, I always wanted to fly. That's great. Sign me up. She came down and said, and that's when I asked her to marry me. We had a total of 6 dates, but they were spread over some time. And it looks like it's going to work out. I got back and went through flight school, married.
Their wedding is one that Lloyd Bentsen and B.A. would retell for years, as it offered a real glimpse of Bentsen as a man.
The minister said, you may kiss the bride. He said, and ran out the side door. I went running out behind him, as I did for the next 55 years, I guess, and found out that he had begun to hemorrhage from the tooth, and went into the courtyard and found a rock that would fit into the cavity, came in, bit on the rock, and then rushed out because he realized he was going to have to. That was our wedding.
Lloyd Bentsen, always doing what it takes to get the job done. Wars don't go smoothly. By early 1944,
then I began to fly missions immediately. I invited one of the fellows then to come back and fly with me. I put him up in the navigator's compartment where he watched the flag come up, see the action on the first mission. After we landed, he said, that's the hell with that. I'm not going to do that anyway. Damn fella get killed doing that.
Bentsen piloted World War II combat missions in B-24 bombers. He took off from Bologna, near the Adriatic Sea, with the 449th Bomb Group. At the age of 23, the Army promoted him to the rank of major. Promoted quickly because so many other service members died. Suddenly, this 23-year-old was commanding a squadron of 600 men.
Because it is a terribly maturing process. When you take command of the lives of people and you're allocating who goes out and who stays and so on. I remember being a little worried that I was too young because when I first took command, I was 23. Until I heard two of the fellows refer to me as the old man. I didn't worry so much about it.
Even in his 20s, Lloyd was tall and self-possessed, with the quiet kind of confidence and assured way of speaking that put people at ease. And then there was the other thing, the kids sent into war. They were kids. Before Pearl Harbor, the initial draft age was 21, but the military lowered it to 18 in 1942. By the time Bentsen was 23, he was overseeing the operations of 15 bombers, crews, and maintenance units.
It was an experience that impacted my life and influenced my life from then on.
To say nothing of all the combat, he dropped bombs on Nazi communication centers, aircraft factories, and other industrial targets in Germany, Italy, Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. The 15th Air Force and the 449th Bomb Group, yes, the same one Bentsen flies with, is also credited with destroying half of Germany's fuel sources on the European continent. In other words, as a major, he achieved concrete success, led his team through scores of seemingly impossible missions. He's trusted and steady, which is why a commander Bentsen served with was so confused when he caught a glimpse of Bentsen reading Hitler's Mein Kampf. Here's Lloyd telling the story to an interviewer years later.
And he said, Bentsen, what are you doing? He said, you got a copy of Mein Kampf in there. And I said, yes, sir, and the other's Mission to Moscow. He said, what are you doing with those two books? And I said, well, Lieutenant, I just want to see what we're fighting about. And that was that. He had no more to say than what.
What kind of a book did you find Mein Kampf to be?
Well, I found
just cause for our trying to stop this madman.
Perhaps because of that very real threat, Lloyd only gave selective updates to B.A. and his family back home. His work was exceedingly dangerous. They knew he flew planes, but Lloyd told them he trained people to fly bomber planes. He didn't tell them that he was a bomber pilot himself. He kept them in the dark.
I had not told my family that I was flying combat because I didn't want to worry my parents or my wife. But when I began to lose so many men, I began to worry that someone back there should be prepared for something new to happen to me.
He had a change of heart. B.A. was pregnant. In just a few months, he would have a family of his own. Staring at what we now know was a staggering 44% mortality rate for bomber pilots, he decides it makes practical sense to loop somebody in who would know the truth.
So I wrote this letter to my father, marked it personal and confidential on the outside.
In the letter, he reflects on his mortality. It reads, "I'm afraid it would be too much. Beryl Ann has too much to worry about with the baby expected in October. Just in case anything should ever happen to me, I want you to know how things stood and make them understand. Dad, nothing will happen. It just couldn't to a fellow who has the finest family in the world waiting for him." Lloyd Bentsen beat the odds. The enemy knew you were coming, and they put up dark clouds of flak and shrapnel, trying to hit your fuel or bomb load before you could reach the target. He survived 35 missions, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and in October of 1944, he and B.A. welcomed their first son, Lloyd Bentsen III, just as planned. The story of how that letter was received is now etched in Bentsen family lore. Here's Lloyd's second son, Lan.
Granddad kept reading it, and Mother and Grandmother were both getting hugely upset, and Grandmother was beating on Granddad going, "You fool, stop, what are you doing?" But that was the first time that Dad had revealed to them where he was, what he was doing, and as we now know subsequently, it was a 44% mortality rate for bomber crews.
Being confronted with life or death situations daily, it showed him something about character, resolve, and strength.
And it was interesting to see how often it was the quiet person under extreme stress that showed the most courage. And often it was the braggadocio, fellow, the blustery fellow that did not have that much courage when the crunch was on.
The crunch was most definitely on, more often than he liked. 3 months before the end of the war in Europe, in February of 1945, Bentsen barely survived a crash landing after coming under enemy fire. He was flying over the Isle of Vis. It's now part of Croatia near the town of Split.
And I lost 2 engines over the target. Had flames coming from one of them for a short while. They blew out, kept losing altitude. We finally got back through the Alps, scraped through some of the valleys. And I remember asking the navigator, I said, I don't think we can make it across the Adriatic, and if we go down the Adriatic, we won't last over 5 minutes because of February, it freezed up very quickly. And I said, there must be someplace we can put it down, but perhaps we'll have to bail out. He said, there's an emergency strip and a dire emergency that they say we can go in on. And I said, well, this damn sure is qualified. Let's see if we can find it. He said, it's changed hands, as I understand, from time to time, but it's supposed to be in Allied hands. Well, we found it at the last minute and got 2 inches out, one of which prop would not feather, which made it an extra drag. And I didn't see it till late, and they were surrounded by hills, so there was no way I could pull it and go around. So I slammed it on the ground, and had a pretty sloppy landing and wiped out the nose cube. But as I got out of it, I had that .45 pistol, and I said, well, that sure won't do me any good. So I just crowd of people coming toward me. grenade bells smoke. And out of that group stepped a young man, and I said, I know you. And he said, sure, you're Bentsen. He said, I used to sack groceries for your mother at Dammy's in McAllen, Texas. Well, I was so delighted. I was never more delighted to see somebody from home.
There's a warmth among Texans, even in the cold of the Alps. By this point, he'd achieved the rank of colonel, a decorated aviator, piloting 35 missions in total in service of his country, before the Allies triumphed on VE Day in May of 1945. Germany surrendered, marking the end of the war on the Eastern Front. Victory in the Pacific would follow. And with the World War over, a real commitment to public service was born, and South Texas was calling. For this young and decorated war hero, there were more ways to serve beyond the military. Next time, the decorated colonel goes home to Texas, and a poker game changes his path, kicking off a life of public service. This podcast is produced by Reasonable Volume with guidance from the Bentsen family. It's executive produced by Elise Hugh and Rachel Swaby, and written by Elise Hugh. Percia Verlin is our production coordinator. The show is engineered by Mark Bush and hosted by me. I'm Patrick Frank. You've been listening to The Bentsen Blueprint.